What would you do if you discovered that the frail, elderly parents you just kicked out into a stormy night were actually secret multimillionaires? On the night of April 22nd, Mary and Robert, an elderly couple who had sacrificed everything for their family, were ruthlessly rejected by their 4 successful children, just as their only home burned to the ground. But what those greedy children never imagined was that the old junk in their parents' house was actually worth millions of dollars. This story takes place in a quiet American town, but its lesson resonates across the world. Before we uncover the sweet revenge delivered by a mysterious stranger, I'd love to know where you're joining us from. Are you watching from sunny California, the hustle and bustle of New York, or the vast fields of Texas? Please leave the name of your state or city in the comments below. We truly cherish your presence here. Now, brace yourselves, because this story of karma will take you from absolute outrage to the most satisfying sense of justice. Mary had met Robert when she was just 19 years old. He worked as a cabinet maker in a small wood shop in town, and she was a seamstress in a textile factory in Detroit. They met at a county fair, and Mary remembered that moment perfectly as if it had been yesterday. Robert was wearing an impeccably ironed white shirt and had the most honest smile Mary had ever seen in her life. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense of the word, but he had brown eyes that conveyed a kindness so genuine that Mary felt she could trust him from the first instant. They married a year later in a humble ceremony, but one full of love. They didn't have much money. In fact, they barely had enough for Mary's simple dress and Robert's borrowed suit, but they had something more valuable. They had shared dreams, they had hopes, they had a love so pure that everyone who knew them could feel it. They spent their wedding night in a small rented room that Robert had been paying for months, working extra shifts at the wood shop, making furniture until the wee hours of the morning, until his hands bled from splinters and exhaustion. Mary became pregnant 6 months after getting married. She remembered with perfect clarity the day she broke the news to Robert. He was working in his small shop, sanding a dining table he had been commissioned to make, when Mary arrived with the news. Robert dropped his tools, lifted Mary in his arms, spinning her around as if she were a feather, laughing and crying at the same time. That night, as they lay in their modest bed, Robert placed his hand on Mary's still flat belly and spoke to his unborn baby. "I promise you will never lack for anything," Robert whispered to that belly that was just beginning to grow. "I will work day and night if necessary, but I will give you everything I never had. You will have an education, you will have opportunities, you will have love, and when you grow up and have your own children, you will remember that your father was always, always there for you." Mary cried that night, not from sadness, but from a happiness so pure she felt her heart was going to explode. She had the most wonderful man in the world, and soon they would have a baby. What more could she ask for? Their first son was born in the spring. They named him Michael, and he was a beautiful baby with his father's eyes and his mother's delicate nose. Robert wept when he saw him for the first time, holding that little being in his large craftsman hands with as much delicacy as if he were holding the most fragile crystal in the world. 2 years later came Sarah, a girl with a strong character who cried with such powerful lungs that Mary swore the whole street could hear her. Then came David, the quietest of the 3, a contemplative boy who from a young age preferred to observe rather than participate. And finally, when Mary thought her family was complete, came the surprise. Emily, the baby of the family, who was born when Mary was 33 and thought she wouldn't have any more children. 4 children, 4 mouths to feed, 4 bodies to clothe, 4 futures to secure. Robert worked tirelessly. His small carpentry business began to grow because Robert was exceptionally good at what he did. His furniture wasn't just functional, they were works of art. Every table he made, every chair, every armoire carried a little piece of his soul. People began to seek him out specifically, willing to pay a little more, because they knew Robert's furniture would last for generations. But Robert never raised his prices as much as he could have. "I don't want to be rich," he would tell Mary when she suggested he charge more. "I just want my children to have enough, to go to good schools, to eat well, not to go through the needs I went through." And boy, did he keep that promise. Robert worked from 5 inches the morning until 10 at night, 6 days a week. Sundays were sacred. They were for family. But the rest of the week Robert practically lived in his shop. Mary also worked tirelessly. During the day, she took care of the children, cooked, cleaned, and at night, when the children slept, she sat at her old sewing machine and did alterations for the neighbors, curtains for local shops, prom dresses for the girls in town. Mary remembered perfectly the nights she stayed up sewing until 3 inches the morning, with fingers swollen from working so much, eyes burning with fatigue, but with a smile on her face, because the next day she could buy Michael those books he wanted so much for school, or pay for Sarah's piano lessons that made her so happy, or take David to the doctor to check that asthma that tormented him so much, or buy Emily those school shoes she needed so badly. The years flew by, as they do when you are too busy living to notice. Michael grew up and became an intelligent and ambitious young man. From a young age, he had shown an incredible facility for numbers, a mathematical mind that his teachers said was exceptional. When it came time to go to college, Michael wanted to study industrial engineering at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, a prestigious university that cost a fortune. Mary would never forget the day Michael came home with the news that he had been accepted into that university. He was so excited. His eyes shone in a way Mary hadn't seen before, but his joy vanished quickly when he started talking about the costs. Tuition was astronomical, books were expensive, housing in Ann Arbor was impossibly pricey. "It doesn't matter, son," Robert told him that night, with a determination in his voice that admitted no argument. "You will go to that university. Your mother and I will take care of everything." And they did. Robert took out a loan from the bank, mortgaging his shop as collateral. Mary sold the only jewelry she had, a pearl necklace she had inherited from her mother, and some gold earrings Robert had given her on their 10th anniversary. Robert started working Sundays too, that sacred day that had always been for family. Mary took on additional sewing jobs, sometimes sewing until dawn to fulfill orders. For 5 years, Mary and Robert lived in extreme austerity to keep Michael in college. They ate the bare minimum, didn't buy new clothes, didn't go to the doctor unless it was absolutely necessary. Every dollar they earned went directly to Michael, for his studies, for his future. And when Michael finally graduated with honors, Robert and Mary wept with pride at the graduation ceremony. They had arrived on a Greyhound bus that took 6 hours, wearing old but clean clothes, sitting in the back rows of the auditorium, but with hearts overflowing with pride. Every sacrifice was worth it, Mary told Robert as they watched their son receive his diploma. "Look what we achieved, honey. Our son is an engineer." Robert hugged her tight, so tight he almost took her breath away. "This is just the beginning," he whispered in her ear. "The other 3 are going to have their opportunities too. We'll work double if necessary, but all our children are going to have what we never had." And they kept that promise. Sarah wanted to be a doctor, specifically a pediatrician, because she loved children in a way that was moving. Medical school was even more expensive than Michael's university, but Mary and Robert never wavered. Robert expanded his business, hiring 2 helpers and accepting larger and more complex projects. Mary began making custom wedding dresses, a job that required exceptional skill and paid much better than the simple alterations she had been doing. David, the contemplative son, turned out to have an extraordinary talent for art. His paintings were beautiful, full of an emotion that transcended words. He wanted to study fine arts at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, and although many told him he could never make a living from art, Robert and Mary supported him unconditionally. "Follow your passion," Robert told him. "Money is important, but happiness is more so. And if painting makes you happy, then that's what you should do." Emily, the youngest, showed a passion for architecture from an early age. She was fascinated by designing buildings, creating spaces, imagining how structures could change people's lives. Her education was also expensive, but Mary and Robert already had experience making impossible sacrifices possible. By the time the 4 children finished their degrees, Mary and Robert were 65 and 68 years old, respectively. Robert was no longer the strong young man who could work 18 hours a day. His hands, those hands that had created such beautiful furniture for decades, now trembled with arthritis. His back, which had carried heavy lumber for 40 years, now caused him constant pain that sometimes left him immobile for days. Mary also felt the weight of the years. Her eyes, which had sewn millions of stitches, now needed thick glasses, and she still struggled to see. Her fingers, once so agile with the needle, were now deformed by rheumatoid arthritis. But it was worth it, right? They had 4 successful children. Michael was a prosperous engineer working at a multinational company, likely one of the big 3 automakers. Sarah was a respected pediatrician with her own clinic. David had achieved the impossible and lived off his art, selling paintings to collectors and galleries in Chicago and New York. Emily was an architect at a prestigious firm designing important commercial buildings. All 4 had achieved what Mary and Robert never had: professional success, economic stability, social respect, and all thanks to the endless sacrifices of their parents. Or at least that's what Mary and Robert believed. The reality, as they would discover in the most painful way possible, was very different. The children's visits began to space out. At first, it was understandable. They had demanding jobs, they had their own families, they had responsibilities. Michael had married a woman named Jennifer, a marketing executive who came from a wealthy family in Bloomfield Hills. They had 2 children, Jacob and Ava. Beautiful children whom Mary and Robert adored, but rarely saw. Jennifer had never been particularly warm with Mary and Robert. She viewed them with a barely disguised disdain, as if she considered them inferior because of their humble origins. "I don't understand why we have to visit them so often," Jennifer would tell Michael when he suggested going to see his parents. "They live in that small, old house. It smells weird and, honestly, it makes me uncomfortable. Besides, your parents are always trying to feed us food that we clearly can't afford to eat because it's full of carbs and fat. They don't understand that we have to watch our figures." Michael, who had once been the most dedicated son, began to echo his wife's opinions. The visits, which used to be weekly, became monthly, then bi-monthly, then occasional. When they visited, Jennifer spent all her time on her phone, clearly bored, sighing exaggeratedly every time Mary tried to converse with her. The children, Jacob and Ava, were so accustomed to expensive toys and technology that they didn't know what to do in their grandparents' simple house. Sarah had married James, a successful lawyer. They didn't have children because, according to Sarah, her career was too important to pause for motherhood. Sarah had changed a lot since becoming a doctor. She was no longer the girl with the strong but affectionate character that Mary remembered. Now she was a sophisticated woman who drove an imported German car. She lived in a penthouse in the best neighborhood of Grand Rapids and wore designer clothes that cost more than Mary and Robert earned in a year. "Mom, why are you still living in this house?" Sarah would ask every time she visited, looking around with evident disapproval. "It's old. It's deteriorated. The neighborhood isn't what it used to be. You should move to something smaller and modern, an apartment for seniors or something like that." Mary tried to explain to her that this house was their home, that every corner held a precious memory, that they had raised their 4 children there, that they had built their life together there. But Sarah simply didn't understand, or didn't want to understand. To her, the house was just an old property occupying a valuable lot. David, the contemplative artist, had married a woman named Jessica, also an artist. They had no children and lived a bohemian life in a spacious loft in downtown Detroit full of paintings and sculptures. David visited a little more than his siblings, but his visits were always brief and seemed more like a duty than a genuine desire to spend time with his parents. He was always distracted, thinking about his next exhibition, his next sale, his next commission. "Dad, Mom," David would say to them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "you have to understand that my artistic career requires all my attention. It's a competitive world. I can't get distracted or I'll fall behind, but I keep you in mind." He always kept them in mind. Mary wondered how he could keep them in mind when months went by without him calling, when his brief visits lasted less than an hour, when he never asked how they really were, how they felt, if they needed anything. Emily, the baby, had always been the sweetest of the 4, but she also changed after her professional success. She married an architect even more successful than her, a man named William, who came from an old money family. William had never hidden his disdain for his wife's humble origins. He tolerated Mary and Robert with barely any courtesy, clearly considering them a stain on his perfect upper-class life. "Emily, your parents are calling again. William would tell her with evident annoyance. "Can you tell them we're busy? We have that dinner with the investors and we don't have time for their dramas." And Emily, sweet Emily, who had once been the most affectionate girl in the world, began to make excuses. She was busy with an important project. She had a meeting she couldn't cancel. She was traveling for work. There was always something more important than visiting her parents. Mary began to notice the change first. She was a mother, and mothers feel these things in their bones. She noticed how the phone calls became shorter and shorter, how her children always seemed in a rush to hang up. She noticed how the visits became more and more spaced out. She noticed how her children no longer asked how they were, how they felt, if they needed anything. "Robert," Mary said one night while they were lying in their old bed, "have you noticed that the kids hardly come to see us anymore?" Robert sighed deeply. Of course, he had noticed. He had also noticed how his children looked at his house with shame, how his sons-in-law and daughter-in-law treated them with barely disguised condescension, how his grandchildren were raised to keep emotional distance from their poor grandparents. "They have their own lives, Mary," Robert replied, although his voice lacked conviction. "They are successful adults with important responsibilities. It's normal for them to be busy." "No," said Mary with a broken voice. "This is different. I had parents too, and even though I was busy raising our children and working, I always found time for them. I always visited them. I always called them. I always looked out for them. This is abandonment, Robert. Our children are slowly abandoning us." Robert hugged Mary while she cried quietly. He felt the pain too, but what could they do? They had given everything for their children. They had sacrificed their youth, their health, their own dreams. And for what? To be forgotten. Now that they were no longer useful, things got worse when Robert had a minor stroke. It was a Sunday morning. He was eating breakfast quietly when he suddenly felt numbness on the left side of his body. Mary saw him and knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. She called 911 and went with him to the hospital, holding his hand the whole way, whispering that everything would be okay, even though she herself was terrified. The doctors said it had been a minor ischemic stroke. Robert would survive, but he would need physical therapy and expensive medications for the rest of his life. They also said he was at high risk of having another stroke, one that could be fatal. Mary called her 4 children from the hospital, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened. She expected them to come running, to drop everything to be with their father in this critical moment. Michael arrived 2 days later, citing work meetings that he absolutely could not cancel. He stayed at the hospital for 30 minutes. He asked briefly about his father's condition and then said he had to go because Jennifer was waiting for him for an important dinner with clients. "But Dad needs support now," Mary told him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Michael, he almost died. Can't you stay a little longer?" "Mom, I have responsibilities," Michael replied with a coldness that froze Mary's blood. "Dad is okay now, right? The doctors said he'll recover. I can't neglect my job for this. I have a family to support, bills to pay." Mary wanted to scream at him that Robert had also had responsibilities, that he also had a family to support, bills to pay, but that he had never, ever let that stop him from being there for his children when they needed him. She wanted to remind him of all the times Robert worked double shifts to pay for his university. All the nights, he slept only 4 hours to finish a carpentry project that would give them enough money for Michael's next semester. But she stayed silent because the pain in her throat was so great she couldn't speak. Sarah arrived the same day as Michael. She came dressed elegantly with high heels that clicked on the hospital floor, with her designer briefcase in hand. She reviewed her father's medical files with a clinical efficiency that would have been admirable if it had been accompanied by any emotion. But Sarah reviewed everything with the same expression she probably used with her patients. Professional, distant, completely devoid of the emotional connection one would expect a daughter to have with her sick father. "The treatment is adequate," Sarah ruled after reviewing everything. "The doctors are doing the right thing. Dad will recover, although he will likely be left with some physical limitations. Make sure he takes his medications on time, Mom, and that he goes to all his physical therapy appointments." "Sarah," said Mary, her voice barely a whisper, "can you stay with us for a few days? Your father needs emotional support, not just medical. He needs to feel that his family is with him. Sarah looked at her designer watch, a gesture Mary had come to hate. I can't, Mom. I have surgery scheduled all week. My patients need me. Your father needs you too, replied Mary, feeling tears beginning to form in her eyes. Mom, understand, said Sarah with an exasperated sigh, as if Mary were a foolish child who didn't understand obvious things. I'm a doctor. I have responsibilities to dozens of families. I can't neglect all those sick children just because Dad had a minor stroke. Besides, you're here to take care of him. That's what wives are for. It's heartbreaking to hear a daughter speak with such cold detachment, treating her own father's crisis like an inconvenience. If you think Sarah's indifference is shocking, wait until you see the lengths these children will go to when money becomes the main topic. And with that, Sarah left, her heels clicking down the hospital hallway, leaving Mary standing there, feeling completely invisible, completely worthless. David didn't even come to the hospital. He called on the phone, his voice sounding distant, almost distracted. Mom, I'd love to go, but I'm in the middle of preparing my next exhibition, and it's super stressful. Besides, surely Dad is okay, right? I mean, the doctors know what they're doing. Send him my best wishes and tell him I'll call him soon. Mary hung up the phone without saying anything else. What could she say? Her son, the sensitive artist who once cried at any injustice, the boy who had been so empathetic he couldn't watch others suffer. Now he considered an art exhibition more important than being with his father after a stroke. Emily didn't come either. She sent expensive flowers to the hospital, imported roses that probably cost a fortune, with a card that read, "Get well soon, Dad. We love you very much. Sorry we can't be there, but we are in the middle of a crucial project." Mary looked at those expensive flowers and felt something break inside her. Her daughter had probably spent $200 on flowers, but couldn't take a day off to visit her father. What had happened to her children? At what point had money, success, social status become more important than family? Robert spent a week in the hospital. Mary didn't leave his side for a single minute. She slept in an uncomfortable chair next to his bed. She ate the horrible hospital food. She refused to leave even when the nurses begged her to go home and rest. During that week, their 4 children called once or twice each, brief conversations where they asked how Dad was, and then invented excuses to hang up quickly. When Robert was finally discharged, Mary had to take him home in a taxi because none of her children were available to pick them up. Michael was in an important meeting. Sarah was in surgery. David was installing his exhibition. Emily was presenting a project to a crucial client. The ride home in that taxi was silent. Mary held Robert's hand, feeling how it trembled slightly from the effect of the stroke. Robert looked out the window, his eyes moist, and Mary knew he was thinking the same thing she was. Their children had abandoned them. The following months were difficult. Robert needed physical therapy 3 times a week. Each session cost $70, which they could barely pay. His monthly medications cost $400. Mary also began to have health problems. Her arthritis worsened day by day. There were days when she couldn't open her own hands without screaming in pain. She also developed hypertension, probably from the stress of caring for Robert and worrying about money. Mary called her children to ask for help. Not much, just a little to cover the medications and therapies, but the response she received destroyed her. "Mom," Michael told her with a tone of evident annoyance, "we aren't children anymore. We can't be depending on you, nor you on us. Everyone has to solve their own problems. Jennifer and I have enormous expenses. The kids go to very expensive private schools. We have 2 cars to maintain, a mortgage to pay. We can't be subsidizing your medical expenses." Mary was left speechless. Subsidizing. The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Her own son considered helping his sick parents a subsidy, like a government grant, rather than an act of love. Sarah was more direct. "Mom, you should have saved for your old age. I told you years ago to sell that old house and move to something smaller to have money saved. But you didn't listen to me. Now you can't come asking us to fix your financial problems. I have my own life, my own career. I did enough when you raised me. That was your decision, your responsibility." Mary hung up the phone, unable to breathe. Sarah had really just said that raising her children had been solely her responsibility, as if children had no moral obligation to care for their elderly parents. David was evasive. "Mom, you know the art world is unstable. Some months I earn well, other months I barely survive. I can't commit to helping you financially on a regular basis. Besides, Dad has government health insurance, right? That should cover his basic needs." Government insurance covered very little, as David would know well if he had bothered to ask or investigate. Emily was the one who hurt the most. She, the baby, the girl who had once said that when she grew up, she would build a beautiful house for her mommy and daddy so they could live like kings. "Mom, I have to be honest with you," Emily said with a voice that sounded rehearsed, as if she had practiced this speech. "William and I have been talking, and we feel that you should consider selling the house. It's too big for two elderly people. The maintenance must be a nightmare and the neighborhood isn't what it was. You could sell, divide the money among the 4 siblings as an early inheritance, and you could move to a nursing home or a smaller, more manageable apartment." Mary felt as if she had been slapped. "Emily," said Mary with a trembling voice, "you are suggesting that we sell our house, the house where we raised all of you, to give you money as an early inheritance?" "Don't look at it that way, Mom," replied Emily, her tone becoming defensive. "Think of it as a smart investment in your future. With your share of the money, you could pay your medical expenses without problems. It's a solution that benefits everyone." "Benefits everyone except your father and me," said Mary, feeling a fury she hadn't felt in years. "This house is our home, Emily. We live here. Our memories are here. We are not going to sell it to give money to you." "You are being selfish, Mom," replied Emily coldly. "When you die, the house will be ours anyway. Wouldn't it be better if we sold it now when we can all benefit, including you?" Mary hung up the phone without answering. Her hands shook so much, she could barely hold the receiver. She sat on the sofa, that old sofa where she had spent so many nights nursing her babies, comforting her children when they had nightmares, waiting for her teenagers to return from their first dates, and she cried. She cried in a way she hadn't cried in decades, with sobs that shook her entire body, with a pain so deep she felt it was splitting her in half. Robert came out of the room, walking slowly with his cane. The stroke had left his left side weakened, and now he walked with difficulty. He sat next to Mary and hugged her, although both knew there were no words that could comfort the pain they felt. "We made a mistake," whispered Robert, his voice broken by emotion. "We thought that by giving them everything, sacrificing ourselves for them, raising them to be successful, we were preparing them for life. But the only thing we did was raise 4 selfish strangers who only think about money." Mary didn't answer, because there was nothing to say. Robert was right. Somehow, somewhere along the way, they had failed as parents, not in giving them love, because they had given them all their love, not in giving them opportunities, because they had sacrificed themselves to the point of exhaustion to give them every opportunity. Perhaps they had failed in teaching them about gratitude, about loyalty, about what it truly means to be a family. The following weeks were a nightmare. The 4 children began to call more frequently, but not to ask how their parents were. They called to pressure them about selling the house. They had met amongst themselves. They had done calculations. They had hired an appraiser without Mary and Robert's permission. The house, located in a neighborhood in Oak Creek that had become very sought after over the years, was worth approximately $1,200,000. "Just think about it, Mom," Michael would tell Mary every time he called. "You could keep $300,000 for yourselves and distribute the remaining $900,000 among the 4 of us. That's $250,000 that could change our lives. With $300,000, you could live comfortably for the rest of your lives, pay for all your medications, you could even travel a little." But Mary and Robert didn't want to travel. They wanted to stay in their house, die in their house, the house they had bought 45 years ago when the 4 children were small. Every corner of that house held a memory, the doorframe in the kitchen where they had marked their children's height every year, the backyard where Robert had built a swing set for the kids, the room where Mary had sewn 1,000 dresses while her children slept, the dining room where they had celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every small triumph of their children. "No," said Robert firmly, when the 4 children showed up together one afternoon to talk seriously about the house. "This house is not for sale. While I am alive, while your mother is alive, this house is our home. And when we die, then you can do whatever you want with it, but not before." The expression on their 4 children's faces was one of disbelief, followed by barely contained fury. "Dad, you're being ridiculous," said Sarah with a hard voice. "You are elderly people with health problems, without sufficient income. It is irresponsible for you to cling to such a valuable property when you could sell it and live comfortably." "We already live comfortably," replied Mary. "We don't need luxuries. We just need our home." "And what about us?" asked David, his voice raising in volume. "Aren't parents supposed to leave something for their children? You are selfishly clinging to a house that will be ours anyway when you die. Why not give it to us now when we really need it?" Mary looked at her son, that son who had once been so sensitive, so empathetic, and saw a complete stranger. "Need it?" asked Mary with a calm she didn't feel. "David, you live in a 2,000-square-foot loft. Sarah, you drive a car that costs more than your father earned in his entire life. Michael, your children go to private schools where the monthly tuition is more than we spend on food in a year. Emily, you live in a mansion with 6 bedrooms. None of you need this money. You want it. That is different. We deserve it," said Emily, her voice cold as ice. "After all we have achieved, after having made something of our lives, despite coming from such a modest home, we deserve that money." Emily's words resonated in the silence that followed like a death sentence. Mary felt something die inside her in that moment. Not pain, not rage, but something more devastating: the death of illusion. The illusion that her children were good people. The illusion that the love she and Robert had given them had created adults with values. The illusion that family meant something. "Get out," said Robert with a voice Mary had never heard from him. It was a hard, final voice, full of an authority that admitted no argument. "Get out of my house right now, all 4 of you." The children looked at each other, clearly not expecting this reaction. "Dad," began Michael, but Robert interrupted him. "I said get out. I've heard enough. You came to my house, the house I bought with the sweat of my brow, the house where I raised all of you, and you have the nerve to tell me I should sell it to you so you can have more money. Money you don't need, that you only want. So get out and don't come back until you can treat us with the respect we deserve." Michael turned red with fury. "Fine, but remember this, Dad. When you're old and senile, when you need someone to change your diapers and feed you, don't come asking us for help. Because if you don't want to help us now, we won't help you when that time comes either." "I am already old," replied Robert with deep sadness in his voice. "And I already need help. And none of you are here, so your threat comes late." The 4 children left the house that day, and for the next few weeks there was no contact whatsoever. Mary thought that maybe, just maybe, her children would reflect on their behavior. She thought that perhaps they would realize how cruel they had been, but she was wrong. What her children did next was something Mary never, in her worst nightmares, would have imagined possible. It started with harassing phone calls. The 4 children took turns calling at all hours of the day and night, pressuring, manipulating, threatening. When Mary and Robert stopped answering the phone, they began to show up unannounced. They knocked on the door at 6 inches the morning, arrived at 11 at night, interrupted meals, naps, the rare moments of peace Mary and Robert had. "Just sign the papers," said Sarah every time she appeared. "It's simple, it's fast, and we can all move on with our lives." "You are being incredibly selfish," added Michael. "Think of your grandchildren. Jacob needs orthodontics that cost thousands of dollars. Ava wants to go to a summer camp in Europe. Are you going to deny your own grandchildren these opportunities just to be stubborn?" Mary wanted to scream that she and Robert had paid for all their children's needs without anyone giving them anything, that they had worked to exhaustion to give them what they never had, that they had sacrificed everything, absolutely everything. And now her children couldn't pay for their own children's orthodontics without selling their parents' house. The pressure was constant, relentless, exhausting. Mary began to lose weight from stress. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time she heard a car stop in front of the house, her heart raced with panic, thinking it would be her children, arriving to harass them again. Robert was suffering too. His blood pressure, which had been relatively controlled after the stroke, began to rise dangerously. The doctor warned them that stress could cause another stroke, one that could be fatal this time. And then, one night in April, the unthinkable happened. It was around 8 inches the evening when the 4 children arrived together. Mary and Robert were eating dinner quietly, trying to enjoy a moment of peace. When they heard the doorbell, they looked at each other with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. "Let's not open it," whispered Mary. "Maybe they'll go away if we don't open." But the 4 children didn't leave. Instead, Michael took out a key he should have returned years ago, but apparently had kept. He opened the door without permission, and the 4 walked in. "We need to talk," said Michael with a voice that admitted no discussion. "We've talked enough," replied Robert, standing up with difficulty. "I asked you not to come any more until you could treat us with respect." "Respect works both ways, Dad," said Sarah coldly, "and you are not respecting us or our needs." What followed was one of the most horrible arguments Mary had witnessed in her life. The 4 children in chorus pressured their parents in increasingly aggressive ways. They told them they were selfish. They told them they were stubborn. They told them they were ruining their own grandchildren's lives. They told them the house was too big for them, that they could no longer maintain it properly, that the yard was unkempt, that the paint was peeling. "Look at yourself, Dad," said David cruelly. "You can barely walk. How are you going to maintain this house? How are you going to climb the stairs when you are even older?" "You are being irrational." "This house is a ranch. It has 1 floor," replied Robert with a trembling voice. "There are no stairs to climb." But David ignored logic because it had never been about logic. It was about money. It had always been about money. The argument escalated and escalated until finally, with a synchronization that suggested they had planned it, the 4 children delivered an ultimatum. "You have 2 weeks, said Michael with a hard voice. 2 weeks to sign the sale papers. We already have an interested buyer who is willing to pay full price. If you don't sign in 2 weeks, we will take legal measures." "Legal measures?" asked Mary, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You are going to sue us?" "We will seek to have you declared incompetent," explained Sarah with clinical coldness. "Dad had a stroke. He has evident cognitive difficulties. A judge could determine that he is no longer capable of making important financial decisions, and they would name one of us as his legal guardian, and then we would sell the house anyway." "Your father has no cognitive difficulties," said Mary, her voice rising hysterically. "He is perfectly lucid. This is monstrous, Sarah. How can you even think of doing something like that?" 2 weeks, repeated Michael, ignoring the tears streaming down his mother's face. "Think about it seriously, because if you don't cooperate, I promise you we will do this by force. And when we finish, not only will you have lost the house, you will also have spent a fortune on lawyers. It's better that you accept now while you can still keep something. Threatening to declare your own lucid parents incompetent just to seize their assets is a new low, even for this family. Mary and Robert are backed into a corner. But brace yourself, because their children's cruelty is about to backfire in the most unexpected way." And with that, the 4 children left the house, leaving Mary and Robert completely destroyed. That night, neither of them could sleep. Mary cried quietly while Robert held her, himself struggling to hold back his own tears. How had they reached this point? How had the babies they had held, the children they had raised with so much love, turned into these greedy monsters? "What are we going to do?" asked Mary between sobs. "We can't let them take our house. We can't, Robert." "They won't," replied Robert with a determination that sounded fragile. "I won't let them do it. This house is ours, and here we will stay until our last day." But they both knew that brave words meant nothing against the cruelty of their children and the power of the legal system they threatened to use against them. The following days were agonizing. Mary and Robert consulted with a lawyer, spending money they barely had seeking legal advice. The lawyer told them that technically their children had no basis to prove incompetence, but that the legal process itself would be long, stressful, and expensive. He recommended they consider making a very clear will, specifying their wishes, and perhaps even selling the house themselves and moving to something smaller to have peace. "But I don't want to move," Mary told the lawyer with a desperate voice. "This is my house. I want to die here." The lawyer sighed with empathy. "Ma'am, I see cases like this all the time. Children who are just waiting for their parents to die to inherit. It's sad, but it's reality. My advice is to protect your peace of mind. Money comes and goes, but peace of mind is priceless." Mary and Robert left the lawyer's office feeling even more defeated. Was their only option really to give in to the demands of their selfish children? The night of April 22nd arrived, the day that would change everything. The 4 children arrived exactly at 7 p.m. They came prepared with legal documents, with expensive pens, with expressions of determination. "Time is up," announced Michael without even greeting them. "Either you sign now or tomorrow we start the legal process." Robert and Mary looked at each other. In that moment, without saying a word, both understood the same thing. They were not going to sign. They were not going to give up. They were not going to let their children steal the only thing they had left. "No," said Robert with a clear and strong voice. "We are not going to sign. This is our house, and here we will stay. If you want to sue us, go ahead, but we are not going to make things easy for you." The expression on the 4 children's faces changed from expectation to pure fury. "You know what?" said Sarah with a venomous voice. "We're fed up. If you want to be this stubborn, then you figure it out alone. Don't expect any help from us ever again." "We never expected help," replied Mary with a dignity that surprised even herself. "You have never helped us, so your threats mean nothing." "Very well," said Michael, his face red with rage. "Then, from this moment, we officially disown you as parents. Don't call us again. Don't expect to see us. Don't count on us for anything. You are alone." "We were already alone," whispered Robert. But none of his children heard him because they were already leaving the house, slamming doors, shouting among themselves about what to do next. Mary and Robert stood there in their living room, trembling, holding on to each other. And then Mary noticed something terrible on the table. The documents their children had left were not just sale papers, they were eviction documents. Their own children had prepared eviction papers, planning to literally kick them out of their own house. "Robert," whispered Mary with a broken voice, "look at this. They were going to throw us out. They were going to literally remove us from our house." Robert took the papers with shaking hands, and there it was in black and white, an eviction notice that his children had prepared in advance, likely planning to use it if Robert and Mary didn't cooperate. That night, something happened that none of them expected. Around 2 inches the morning, Mary woke up to a strange smell. It took her a moment to identify it, but when she did, panic flooded her completely. "Smoke! Robert!" she shouted, shaking her husband. "There's smoke. The house is on fire." They got up as fast as their elderly bodies allowed. The smoke was coming from the kitchen, and when they got there, they saw flames coming out of one of the cabinets. Mary ran to the phone to call the fire department, while Robert tried to put out the fire with an old extinguisher that barely worked. The firefighters arrived in 15 minutes, but the damage was already done. The kitchen was destroyed. Smoke had damaged a large part of the living room, and the firefighters said the house was not habitable in that state. It needed extensive repairs that would cost at least $50,000. $50,000 that Mary and Robert didn't have. The fire chief explained that the fire had started from a short circuit in the old kitchen wiring. It was an accident, but one that had left Mary and Robert homeless that night. "Do you have family who can host you while you repair the house?" asked the fire chief with genuine concern. Mary and Robert looked at each other. Technically, they had 4 children, but after what had happened just hours before, after their own children had disowned them, could they really ask for help? "We'll try calling them," said Mary without conviction. The firefighters left after ensuring the structure of the house was safe and there was no risk of more fires. Mary and Robert stood in their front yard at 4 inches the morning, looking at their damaged house, not knowing what to do. Mary called Michael. The phone rang and rang until it went to voicemail. She called Sarah. The same. David didn't answer. Emily neither. She tried sending text messages explaining the emergency, the house on fire, that they needed a place to stay, even for one night. Nothing. Absolute silence from all 4. Finally, at 5 inches the morning, it began to rain. Not a gentle rain, but a torrential storm, as if the sky itself were crying for Mary and Robert's tragedy. "We can't stay here in the rain," said Robert, coughing from the smoke he had inhaled. "We're going to get sick." "Where are we going to go?" asked Mary, feeling total despair taking over her. "We don't have money for a hotel. Our children aren't answering. Robert, we have nowhere to go. We are completely alone." Robert hugged Mary in the rain, both trembling, both crying. "Let's try the kids one more time," said Robert. "They can't be cruel enough to leave us on the street in the rain." But Mary knew the truth. Her children could be that cruel, and they were about to prove it. They took a taxi with the last $100 Robert had in his wallet. They asked the driver to take them to Michael's house. The driver, an older man in his 60s, looked at the soaked couple with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Did something happen?" "There was a fire in our house," explained Mary with a trembling voice. "We are going to stay with our son for a few days." The driver nodded, but Mary could see the concern in his eyes through the rear-view mirror. They arrived at Michael's house at 5:30 a.m. It was a huge house in an exclusive suburb with a perfectly manicured lawn and 2 expensive cars in the driveway. Mary and Robert walked to the door, soaked, coughing, shivering with cold. Robert rang the doorbell. They waited. He rang again. Finally, after several minutes, Michael opened the door in a robe, his expression of annoyance changing to shock when he saw his parents. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice raspy with sleep. "There was a fire," explained Robert quickly. "The house. The kitchen burned down. We can't stay there. We just need a place for a few days until we can fix things." Michael looked at his soaked parents, saw their desperate faces, and for a moment Mary thought she would see compassion in her eldest son's eyes, but what she saw was something much worse. Calculation. "A fire," said Michael slowly. "How convenient." "Convenient?" repeated Mary, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's very convenient that there's a fire right after we told you we wouldn't sell the house," replied Michael coldly. "Now you're going to need money for repairs, right? Money you don't have. So you're going to have to sell anyway." Mary couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Michael, this was an accident, a short circuit. The firefighters confirmed it. It has nothing to do with—" "You can't stay here," interrupted Michael, wrinkling his nose as if he smelled something rotting. He glanced at his father's soot-stained coat with pure disgust. "Look at you. You're filthy. You smell like smoke and poverty. Jennifer just bought white Italian leather sofas. She has standards, Dad. She won't have you ruining the aesthetic of our home with your mess. Go find a shelter. That's what they are there for." "But we are your parents," said Robert, his voice breaking. "Son, please, just for one night. We are soaked. I am sick. Your mother is shaking. Please." Michael looked over his shoulder, as if verifying that Jennifer wasn't listening. Then he turned to his parents, and with a voice completely devoid of emotion said, "I'm sorry, but no. If you want help, sell the house. That is the only way we will help you." And he closed the door. Mary and Robert stood there in the pouring rain, staring at that closed door. The taxi that had brought them was already gone. They had no money for another one. They had nowhere to go. "Let's try with Sarah," said Robert, although his voice had lost all hope. They walked for 40 minutes in the rain until they reached Sarah's place. Every step was agony. Robert's legs barely responded, weakened by the stroke and now by exhaustion and cold. Mary coughed constantly. The smoke from the fire had irritated her lungs. When they arrived at Sarah's home, a luxurious apartment building with security at the entrance, they couldn't even get in. The security guard stopped them. "Where are you going?" he asked suspiciously, looking at their soaked and disheveled appearance. "We came to see our daughter Sarah Ruiz," explained Mary. "She lives in the penthouse." The guard made a call. After a minute, he hung up and shook his head. "Dr. Ruiz says she isn't expecting visitors and that you cannot go up." "Please," begged Mary, "tell her it's an emergency, that there was a fire in our house, that please just let us talk to her." The guard made another call. This time the conversation was longer. Finally, he hung up with an uncomfortable expression. "The doctor says," She says if it's really an emergency, you should go to a shelter, that she cannot help you because she has early surgeries tomorrow and needs to rest. Mary felt as if someone had ripped her heart out of her chest. Sarah, her daughter, the girl she had nursed, whom she had cared for during her childhood asthma attacks, whom she had supported during her teenage years, was rejecting her and sending her to a shelter. There was no answer, only the sound of the rain and the security guard watching them with a mix of pity and discomfort. Next stop, David's place. But David didn't even open the door. He shouted from inside for them to leave him alone, that he had already made it clear he didn't want to get involved in their dramas. Finally, they arrived at Emily's house, their baby, their little girl. By the time they got there, Mary and Robert could barely walk. They were completely soaked, shivering uncontrollably, coughing endlessly. Robert had a fever. Mary could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Emily opened the door, but didn't let her parents in. She stood on the threshold, blocking the entrance with her body. "Mom, Dad," she said with a tense voice. "William says you can't stay here. He says if I let you in, he will leave, and I can't risk my marriage for this." "For this?" repeated Mary, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Emily, we are your parents. There was a fire. We have nowhere to go. And you call this? "I'm sorry," said Emily, but her eyes were dry. There were no tears, no true regret. "But you made your decision when you refused to sell the house. Now you have to live with the consequences. The consequences of wanting to stay in our own home," said Robert with a voice so weak it was barely a whisper. "You have to go," said Emily, looking nervously back inside the house. "William is going to wake up, and if he sees you here, there will be trouble." And she closed the door. Mary and Robert stood there under the rain that kept falling relentlessly. It was 8 inches the morning. They had spent 3 hours walking from one house to another, being rejected by each of their 4 children. "We have no one," whispered Mary, her voice completely broken. "My God, Robert, we have no one in the whole world. Can you imagine the sheer despair of knocking on your own child's door in a storm, only to be turned away? It's a darkness no parent should ever have to face. But as they say, it is often darkest just before the dawn, and help is coming from a very unlikely place." Robert hugged Mary, both trembling violently in the rain. "I'm sorry," whispered Robert, starting to cry. "I'm so sorry, my love. I failed you. I promised I would always protect you, that I would always take care of you. And now look, we are on the street, soaked, sick, with no one to help us." "I failed you. You didn't fail me," sobbed Mary. "We didn't fail, they did. Our children failed us." They didn't know how long they stood there in the rain, hugging, crying. It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. Everything became blurry. Mary felt she was floating, consciousness drifting in and out. She knew she was in shock, probably hypothermia too. Finally, Robert took Mary's hand. "We have to move," he said. "If we stay here, we are going to die." They walked aimlessly through the city streets. The rain had let up a bit, but it kept falling steadily. People passed by them in comfortably dry cars, without even looking twice. 2 soaked elderly people with 2 old suitcases walking aimlessly in the rain. No one stopped. No one asked if they needed help. Mary thought of all the times she had helped others. All the times she had sewn clothes for free for families who couldn't pay. All the times she had given food to struggling neighbors. All the times she had watched other people's children without charging them. And now, when she needed help, there was no one. Eventually, they found shelter under the awning of a closed store. They sat on the cold ground, huddled together, trying to stay warm. Robert had stopped talking. His eyes were closed and his breathing was shallow. "Robert," whispered Mary, shaking him gently. "Robert, please, don't fall asleep. You have to stay awake." But Robert didn't answer. Mary could feel him shaking violently, his body fighting against hypothermia. She began to pray. She prayed with more fervor than she had prayed in her entire life. She prayed for someone, anyone, to see them and offer help. She prayed for her children to reconsider and come looking for them. She prayed that this was just a nightmare from which she would soon wake up. It was then that a car stopped in front of them. It was a sleek black Mercedes, definitely the car of someone important. Mary didn't even look up. She was too exhausted, too defeated. The car door opened and someone got out. Mary heard steps approaching and finally looked up. It was a man of about 55, elegantly dressed in an expensive suit and a wool coat. He held a large umbrella that protected him from the rain. The man approached and knelt in front of Mary and Robert. His eyes showed genuine concern that Mary hadn't seen in a long time. "Ma'am, sir," said the man with a kind voice. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Mary looked at this stranger and something inside her broke. She began to cry uncontrollably, sobs that shook her entire body. "Please," she managed to say between sobs, "my husband is very sick. He needs a doctor. Please, help us." The man didn't hesitate for a second. He immediately pulled out his phone and called an ambulance. Then, with extraordinary gentleness, he helped Robert stand up. "We're taking him to the hospital right now," said the man with determination. "My car is here. We can't wait for the ambulance." With the help of his chauffeur, the man helped Robert into the car. Mary followed him, still crying, unable to believe that finally someone was offering them help. During the ride to the hospital, the man asked questions. Mary, between broken sobs, told him everything. The fire, the closed doors, the 4 children who had rejected them, the hours walking in the rain. The man's expression became increasingly serious, increasingly indignant. "Your own children did this?" he asked in disbelief. "They left you on the street in the rain?" Mary could only nod. The words wouldn't come out. They arrived at the hospital, and the man insisted on paying all medical expenses. Robert was admitted immediately. The doctors said he had developed pneumonia, that his blood pressure was dangerously high, that he had suffered another minor stroke. If he had spent another hour in the rain, he probably would have died. Mary was also examined. She had mild hypothermia, acute bronchitis, and her blood pressure was also out of control. They gave her dry hospital clothes and warm blankets, and let her stay in the room with Robert. The man who had saved them, who finally introduced himself as Richard Sterling, a successful businessman in the city, stayed with them for hours. He didn't leave until he made sure both were stabilized. Before leaving, Richard gave Mary his personal card. "Rest," he told her kindly. "Tomorrow I will come to visit you, and we will talk about how we can help you more permanently. But for now, just focus on recovering." "Why?" asked Mary, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you helping us?" "You don't even know us," Richard smiled sadly. 5 years ago I lost my mother, he explained. She died alone in a nursing home because I was too busy building my business empire to visit her. Every day I regret that. Every day I wish I could go back and spend more time with her. When I saw you there in the rain, you reminded me so much of my mother that I felt it was a second chance, a chance to do the right thing. Richard paused, discreetly wiping away a tear. "And when I heard your story, when you told me about your children, I felt a fury I hadn't felt in years, because your children are making the same mistake I made, but worse, much worse. And if I can prevent them from regretting it for the rest of their lives, then that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes, salvation comes not from the blood you raised, but from the kindness of a complete stranger." Richard isn't just offering them a ride. He's about to hand Mary and Robert the key to a justice they never thought possible. Let's see what he uncovers. That night, Mary slept for the first time in days. It wasn't a deep or peaceful sleep. It was full of nightmares and startles. But at least she was warm, she was dry, and Robert was alive beside her in the hospital bed, breathing with the help of oxygen, but alive. The next day, Richard returned just as he promised. He was accompanied by a lawyer. "I've been thinking about your situation," Richard said bluntly, "and I have a proposal." Over the next hour, Richard explained his plan. He would pay for the repairs to Mary and Robert's home, but Richard wanted to go further. He wanted to send a message to Mary and Robert's children, and he had the means and contacts to do it. "With your permission," said Richard, looking at Mary and Robert seriously, "I would like to investigate your children's financial situation, and I would like to make your story public. Not for revenge, but for justice, so that other families can see what happens when success and money corrupt fundamental values." Mary and Robert looked at each other. Part of them still loved their children. They still hoped this was all a nightmare from which they would wake up. But another part, the part that had walked for hours in the rain being rejected time and again, that part wanted justice. "Do what you have to do," said Robert with a weak but firm voice. "Our children abandoned us. It is time they face the consequences of their actions." What Richard discovered in his investigation left everyone in shock, including Mary and Robert. Michael, the eldest son, didn't just have a prosperous business, he had three. He was a multimillionaire several times over. He lived in obscene luxury, while his parents had been struggling to pay for medication. Sarah, the doctor, earned more than $30,000 a month just from her clinic, not counting her other income from conferences and publications. Her penthouse had cost $1,200,000. She had 2 luxury cars. She spent more on clothes in a month than her parents spent on food in a year. David, the struggling artist, turned out to have paintings selling for exorbitant sums. One of his works had recently sold for $500,000. His modest loft was worth over $1 million. He had more money in the bank than his parents had earned in their entire combined lives. And Emily, the architect, was a partner at a firm managing multi-million-dollar projects. Her house, the mansion where she had slammed the door in her parents' faces, was worth $2.5 million. She and her husband lived a life of absolute luxury. None of them needed the money from the sale of their parents' house. They wanted it out of pure greed, avarice. But there was more. Richard discovered something that neither Mary nor Robert knew. When Robert had built his cabinetry business decades ago, it had been more successful than even he realized. The property where his shop had been located, which Robert had sold when he retired at 65 for just $200,000 to afford a comfortable retirement, was now worth $5 million due to the area's development. Robert had sold that property to a developer who offered him $200,000, telling him it was a fair price. Robert, inexperienced in real estate and desperate to secure his retirement, had accepted. But the developer had swindled them terribly. The property was worth at least $2 million back then. Even in that moment, Richard hired private investigators who discovered that the developer who bought the property from Robert had connections to Emily's husband. William, Emily's husband, had known about the true value of the property. He had helped his contact swindle Robert and had likely received a commission for it. When Richard showed this information to Mary and Robert, both were completely devastated. Not only had their children abandoned them, but the son-in-law of one of them had actively participated in scamming them years ago. "Emily, does she know this?" asked Mary with a trembling voice. "It's hard to know for sure," replied Richard, "but I suspect she does, or at least she must have had her suspicions when she saw the amount of money her husband made that year." Robert began to cry, deep sobs shaking his weakened body. "I worked 40 years in that shop," he said between sobs. 40 years making furniture, building a business, and I was robbed. My own family robbed me." Mary hugged him, crying herself. All this time they had lived thinking they had retired with a modest but adequate cushion. They didn't realize they had been cheated out of millions. "But there is more," said Richard, with a strange expression on his face. "And this is where things get really interesting." Richard explained that he had hired a professional appraiser to evaluate the furniture Robert had made during his career. Many of them still existed in homes around the city and the region. Robert's furniture, it turned out, was extraordinary. It wasn't just well made. It had a unique style that made it highly valuable to collectors. The appraiser explained that Robert had been a master craftsman who didn't know how talented he really was. "Mr. Robert," said Richard with a smile, "your furniture pieces are considered collectibles. There are people who would pay fortunes to own an original Robert Miller. If we track down all the furniture you made and authenticate it, we are talking about a collective value of more than $5 million. Robert looked at Richard in disbelief. That's impossible. I just made furniture. Tables, chairs, armoires, nothing special." "They were special," insisted Richard, "and they are worth a fortune. But there is a problem. The problem was that much of that furniture had been sold or given away years ago. Tracking it all down would be difficult, if not impossible." However, Richard had another idea. I have spoken with several collectors and galleries, explained Richard. Everyone is interested in your work. If you could make a few more pieces, even with your current health, even if they are smaller pieces, they would sell for tens of thousands of dollars each. Mary and Robert couldn't believe what they were hearing. For all these years they had lived thinking they were poor, that they had failed financially, that they had nothing to leave their children except a modest house. And it turns out Robert had been a master craftsman whose work was worth millions. But there is something else you need to know, said Richard, his expression turning serious. I found something in my investigation that changes everything. Richard pulled out a folder full of documents. They were financial records, deeds, contracts. When Robert sold his shop 10 years ago, Richard explained, the contract included a clause that no one noticed, a clause stating that if the property was rezoned to become a high-value commercial zone within 15 years of the sale, Robert was legally entitled to an additional percentage of the value. Robert looked at the documents with confusion. I never read that. The developer said it was a standard contract. It was, said Richard, but it included that protection for the seller. And the property was rezoned 3 years ago, which means Robert is legally entitled to an additional $1.5 million. The silence in the hospital room was absolute. $1.5 million, repeated Mary with a trembling voice. Exactly, confirmed Richard, and I have consulted with my lawyers. The case is solid. You can sue the developer, and you will win. It is just a matter of time. Talk about a twist of fate. Robert was sitting on a gold mine while his children treated him like a burden. You have to wonder how Michael and Emily will react when they realize they threw away a multi-million-dollar fortune along with their parents. When the news of the lawsuit and the hidden fortune hit the local papers, the reaction in the 4 children's homes was chaotic. Michael reportedly smashed his phone against the wall, screaming that that money belonged to the family. Emily collapsed on her kitchen floor, realizing that the $2 million she desperately needed to save her reputation was sitting in the bank account of the parents she had left in the rain. They didn't cry because they missed their parents. They cried because they realized their inheritance had just walked out the door, leaving them with nothing but their greed. Robert closed his eyes, trying to process all this information. For months he had been worried about money, stressed about not being able to pay for medications, feeling like a failure because he couldn't support his wife comfortably in their old age. And it turns out he was entitled to more than $1.5 million. Why are you helping me with this? Robert asked Richard. You already did more than enough saving us that night. Richard smiled sadly. Because when I see your situation, I see my mother's situation. She also worked all her life, also sacrificed everything for her children. And when she died, she had more money than I knew. She had saved secretly for years, denying herself basic luxuries to be able to leave something for her children. And I didn't even know until after her death, because I was too busy to visit her, to talk to her about her life. Richard paused, his eyes moistening. I can't change what I did to my mother, but I can ensure that you don't end up like her, alone and unappreciated, and I can ensure that your children learn a lesson I learned too late. Over the next few weeks, while Robert recovered in the hospital and Mary remained by his side, Richard put his plan into action. First, he hired the best lawyers to sue the developer who had bought Robert's shop. The lawsuit included not only the $1.5 million from the rezoning clause, but also additional damages for deliberately withholding information. Second, Richard used his contacts in the media to make Mary and Robert's story public. An investigative reporter did a full special on the situation. Elderly parents, abandoned by millionaire children after sacrificing everything for them. The story went viral. Thousands of people shared it on social media, expressing their outrage and support for Mary and Robert. The comments filled with similar stories of abandoned parents, ungrateful children, families broken by greed. But Richard didn't stop there. Using his extensive contacts in the business world, he began to circulate information about Michael, Sarah, David, and Emily within their professional circles. Michael began to lose clients, respectable business people who didn't want to associate with someone who had abandoned his sick parents in the pouring rain. His reputation in the business community plummeted. Sarah faced an ethics investigation by the state medical board. Several parents pulled their children from her clinic, saying they didn't trust that a doctor who treated her own parents like that could care properly for their children. David saw galleries cancel his exhibitions. The art world, although often superficial, valued certain appearances of humanity and compassion. An artist who abandoned his elderly parents didn't fit that image, and Emily faced the worst consequences. Her architecture firm, which had built its brand around family values and designing homes for families, was forced to fire her when the press began asking uncomfortable questions about how an architect who designed homes for families had left her own parents homeless. Furthermore, her husband William's connection to the shop scam came to light. William faced criminal charges for fraud. His professional license was suspended, and in a matter of weeks, Emily found herself facing not only the loss of her career, but also her marriage, as William blamed her for everything. When the police arrived at their door, William didn't try to protect his wife. Instead, he pointed a finger directly at her, claiming she knew everything. In that moment, watching the man she had prioritized over her parents try to throw her under the bus, Emily finally broke. The illusion of her perfect life didn't just crack, it shattered. The 4 siblings tried to contact their parents after all this came to light. They called dozens of times, sent messages, showed up at the hospital demanding to see their parents. But Richard had hired private security. The 4 siblings were turned away every time. "Your parents do not want to see you," the security guard informed them, "and they have every right to refuse visitors." Michael finally managed to send a letter that reached Mary. In it, he tried to explain his actions, justify his decisions, blame Jennifer for many of the things he had done. The letter ended with a plea. "Mom, please forgive me. I didn't know things would go this far. Let me fix it." Mary read the letter and wept. Part of her, the part that would always be a mother, wanted to forgive, wanted to believe her children were truly sorry. But a wiser part, a part that had grown through pain, knew the truth. "They aren't sorry for what they did," Mary told Robert while holding the letter. "They are sorry for the consequences. It is different." Robert nodded weakly from his hospital bed. "What do you want to do?" Mary thought for a long moment. Then, with trembling hands, she wrote a response that she would deliver through Richard's lawyers. "Dear children, for 50 years your father and I gave you everything. Not just material things, but our time, our energy, our health, our entire lives. We worked to exhaustion so that you could have opportunities we never had. We sacrificed our own dreams so you could pursue yours. And when we needed your help, when we found ourselves in the darkest moment of our lives, every single one of you closed the door in our faces. You literally left us walking in the torrential rain, sick, scared, with nowhere to go. Now you come with apologies. Now you want to fix things. But not because you truly feel it. You do it because you face social and professional consequences for your actions. You do it because your reputation is ruined. You do it because finally there is a price to pay for your cruelty. True repentance comes accompanied by a genuine change in behavior. True repentance means accepting responsibility without excuses, without blaming others. And none of you have shown that kind of repentance. Michael, in your letter you blame Jennifer, but you made the decisions. You closed the door. Sarah, you sent a message saying you were under a lot of professional stress. But thousands of doctors handle stress without abandoning their parents. David, your message said you didn't understand the gravity of the situation, as if there were any ambiguity about leaving your elderly parents on the street in the rain. Emily, your letter hurt the most. You said William manipulated you, that you really wanted to help us but couldn't risk your marriage. But a marriage that forces you to abandon your sick parents is not a marriage worth saving. And now that William faces criminal charges and has left you, suddenly you want to come back to us. As your second choice, as your plan B. It won't work like that. Your father and I have made a decision. We do not disown you as children, because that would be denying 50 years of our own lives. But we are not going to pretend to be a happy family either. From now on, our relationship will be strictly formal and legal. When we die, you will inherit what the law dictates. But while we are alive, I do not want your presence in our lives. I do not want your empty apologies. I do not want your false regret. What I do want is for you to reflect on the type of people you have become. Look in the mirror and ask yourselves how you became capable of such cruelty toward the people who gave you life. And if someday you have your own children, treat them better than you treated us. Because the pain of being betrayed by your own children is something I wish on no one, not even you. With sadness, but with peace in my decision, your mother. The letter caused shock when it was delivered. The 4 siblings had expected that eventually their parents would cave, forgive them, and things would return to some kind of normalcy. This letter made it clear that would not happen. Sarah tried one last time. She appeared at the hospital with tears real or acted running down her face, begging to see her mother. The security guard gave her the same message he had given so many times. "Your mother does not want to see you." "But she is my mother," screamed Sarah with desperation. "I have a right to see her." "Your mother has the right to decide who visits her," replied the guard calmly. "And she has decided that you are not welcome." Sarah collapsed in the hallway, crying hysterically. Some nurses looked at her with pity, others with disgust, having heard the story of what she had done. Eventually, hospital security had to escort her out of the building. While all this was happening, the lawsuit against the developer progressed rapidly. Richard's lawyers were exceptional, and the case was solid. The developer, facing certain defeat and negative publicity, decided to settle. Robert would receive $2 million more than the $1. $5 million owed from the clause, plus additional damages, plus interest accumulated over 10 years. When Richard gave the news to Robert and Mary in the hospital, both remained silent for a long moment. $2 million, repeated Robert finally, as if the words made no sense. All our lives we thought we were poor, that we had failed financially, and it turns out. "It turns out you always had value," completed Richard with a smile. "Robert's work always had value. Your property always had value. It's just that people took advantage of your humility and lack of knowledge about these things." Mary began to cry, but this time they weren't tears of sadness, but of a relief so deep it was almost painful. "What are we going to do with so much money?" asked Mary. Richard smiled. "That is the best part. You can do whatever you want. You can travel. You can live comfortably for the rest of your lives without worrying about money ever again. You can donate to causes you care about. It is your money, your choice." During the following weeks, while Robert continued recovering, he and Mary had many conversations about what to do with their new financial situation. They decided to keep their house. Richard personally supervised the repairs after the fire, ensuring everything was done perfectly. They didn't just repair the damage, they updated the whole house. New kitchen, new bathrooms, new electrical system, new paint. The house that Mary and Robert loved was now better than ever. But they decided to do something else. With Richard's help, they established a foundation, the Miller Foundation for Abandoned Parents. The foundation would offer legal, financial, and emotional support to elderly people who had been abandoned or abused by their own children. "No one should go through what we went through," said Mary at the press conference when they announced the foundation. "No parent should have to choose between their home and appeasing greedy children. No elderly person should walk in the rain with nowhere to go." The foundation became an immediate success. Hundreds of people reached out looking for help, sharing similar stories of abuse by relatives, of children who only waited for inheritances, of abandonment in their most vulnerable years. Mary and Robert also decided to do something special. They contacted the taxi driver who had taken them to Michael's house that terrible night. The man, named George, had been worried about them but didn't know how to help. "You showed more compassion in 10 minutes than our own children showed in years," Robert told him when they invited him to their restored house. "We want to reward you." That is why they gave George $100,000, enough so he could retire comfortably or open his own business if he preferred to keep working. George wept, unable to believe the generosity. "I only did what any decent person would do," said George with tears running down his cheeks. "I saw you that night so fragile, so scared, and it broke my heart. I never imagined, never thought it would end like this." "That is exactly why you deserve this gratitude," replied Mary, hugging the man. "Because you did what any decent person would do, but our own children didn't. That makes you more valuable to us than them." The story of Mary and Robert continued to appear in the news for months. Their case became a symbol of a larger problem affecting thousands of seniors across the country. TV programs invited them to tell their story. Newspapers wrote editorials about the crisis of elderly abandonment. Legislators began proposing new laws to protect older people from financial and emotional abuse by family members. Meanwhile, the 4 children faced the full consequences of their actions. Michael lost more than half his clients. His company, which had once been prosperous, now struggled to survive. Jennifer, seeing the financial situation deteriorating, left him and filed for divorce. She took the children, Jacob and Ava, and demanded exorbitant alimony and child support. Michael found himself alone, facing financial ruin with a destroyed reputation and no family. One afternoon, Michael appeared on the city's most popular TV program. The interviewer wasn't kind. "Mr. Miller," began the interviewer with a hard voice, "millions of people have heard the story of how you and your siblings abandoned your elderly parents in the pouring rain. What do you have to say about it?" Michael, who looked gaunt and aged years in just months, stuttered, trying to explain himself. It was a terrible mistake. I never should have. But the situation was complicated. My wife had strong opinions and I—" "Your wife?" interrupted the interviewer with evident disgust. "You are blaming your wife for your own decisions to close the door in your sick mother's face?" "No, that's not what I mean." Michael tried to recover, but it was clear he was losing. "What I mean is that I let myself be influenced, that I made horrible decisions for the wrong reasons." "And now?" asked the interviewer. "What do you hope to achieve with this interview?" Michael looked directly at the camera, his eyes moist. "I hope my parents hear me, that they know I regret it more than words can express, that if I could go back and change everything, I would without hesitation. Mom, Dad, if you are watching this, please, give me a chance to fix it." But Mary and Robert weren't watching. They had left behind the news, the programs, the entire media circus. They were focused on rebuilding their lives and helping others facing similar situations. Sarah lost her pediatric clinic. Parents, one after another, pulled their children out, saying they didn't trust a doctor who had been so cruel to her own parents. Debts piled up. The clinic closed. Sarah had to sell her $1.2 million penthouse to pay debts. Her husband James left her. Just like Jennifer had left Michael, jumping off the sinking ship, Sarah fell into a deep depression. She spent days without leaving her small apartment, a dramatic fall from her penthouse without showering, without eating properly. One night, at her lowest point, she considered suicide. She held the pills in her hand, ready to end it all. But then her phone rang. It was an old colleague, a doctor who had been her mentor years ago. "Sarah," said the woman with a firm but compassionate voice, "I know what you're going through, and I know you probably think your life is over, but you're wrong. Your career as you knew it is over. Yes, your public reputation is destroyed. Yes, but you are still alive. You are still a talented doctor. You can still do something meaningful with the rest of your life." "How?" asked Sarah with a broken voice. "No one will hire me. No one will trust me. Come work with me," offered the mentor. "I work at a free clinic in the poor neighborhoods of Detroit, attending to families who can't afford medical care. It doesn't pay well, in fact it barely pays, but it is honest work, helping people who really need it. Maybe it's what you need to rebuild, not your reputation, but your soul." Sarah accepted. She had no other options, but somewhere deep inside her she also recognized that she deserved this fall, this humiliation, this chance to start from zero. David saw his artistic career evaporate overnight. Galleries canceled his exhibitions. Collectors who had been fighting for his works now didn't even answer his calls. His wife Jessica, who turned out to be as superficial as she was beautiful, left him when she saw the money running out. "I didn't sign up for this," Jessica told him as she packed her things. "I married a successful artist, not a social pariah who can't sell a single painting." David was left alone in his loft, that space that had once been full of life and creativity, now feeling empty and cold. One night, drunk and desperate, he took his most recent paintings and destroyed them all. He slashed the canvases, threw paint everywhere, screaming in frustration and self-hatred. When he finally calmed down, He sat on the floor surrounded by the remains of his destroyed work, and cried not for the lost paintings, but for something much deeper. He wept for the man he had become, for the values he had lost in his pursuit of success. And for the first time since it all began, David truly understood what he had done. Not intellectually, like when you watch the news and think, how terrible, but viscerally in his bones. He understood the pain he had caused. He understood the betrayal. He understood there were no excuses, no justifications, only a simple and horrible truth. He had abandoned his parents when they needed him most, because it was more convenient for him. Emily faced the worst consequences of all. Not only did she lose her job, but her husband William was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud. The scandal was huge. The media hounded her constantly, shouting questions about whether she knew about the fraud, if she had been involved. The truth was more complicated. Emily hadn't actively participated in the fraud, but she had suspected something. She had seen the amounts of money entering their accounts that year. She had heard half conversations between William and his partners. She had seen documents that didn't make sense. But she had chosen not to ask questions because she didn't want to know the answers. Because if she knew, she would have to act. And acting would mean losing the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. Now, that same lifestyle had vanished. The $2.5 million mansion was foreclosed. Her luxury cars were repossessed. Her bank accounts were frozen by the criminal investigation. Emily found herself living in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she would have once considered dangerous, working as an administrative assistant at a small construction company, earning just enough to survive. But the worst wasn't the financial fall. The worst was the loneliness. Her friends from the architecture world had abandoned her as quickly as she had abandoned her parents. Calls weren't returned. Invitations to events stopped coming. Even her daughter, the one Emily had with her first boyfriend at 17 and whom Mary had helped raise, refused to speak to her. How could you do that to Grandma and Grandpa? Her daughter Andrea had asked in their last conversation. Grandma took care of me when you couldn't. She changed diapers, fed me, stayed up with me when I was sick, and you repaid her by slamming the door in her face when she needed you. Andrea, please, Emily had begged, try to understand. William pressured me. I was afraid of losing my marriage. Your marriage to a criminal, Andrea had replied coldly. A criminal who scammed your own father. And instead of reporting him, instead of protecting your parents, you stayed silent because it suited you. I don't want to talk to you again, Mom. Not until you truly understand what you did. And Andrea had kept her word. She didn't answer calls, didn't reply to texts. Emily had lost not only her parents but also her daughter. Losing her fortune was one thing, but losing the respect of her own child is the blow that finally shatters Emily's denial. Now that they have lost absolutely everything, the siblings are about to try the one thing they haven't done yet, begging for forgiveness in person. But ask yourself, is it simply too late? The 4 siblings tried several more times to contact Mary and Robert. They sent letters, gifts, flowers. Michael even hired a professional mediator to try to facilitate a reconciliation. But Mary and Robert stood firm in their decision. It's not about revenge, Mary explained to Richard one day while drinking coffee in their restored house. I don't enjoy seeing my children suffer, but I can't pretend we are a happy family. They made choices that revealed their true character, and I have to protect myself emotionally. If I let them in again, they will hurt me again. Maybe not in the same way, but they will hurt me. I understand completely, replied Richard. And I think you are making the right decision. Forgiveness doesn't mean restoring a relationship that was toxic. Sometimes forgiveness means letting go and moving on. Mary nodded, tears forming in her eyes. The hardest part is remembering how they were when they were little. Michael was so affectionate, he always wanted to help me in the kitchen. Sarah was so protective of her younger brothers. David was so sensitive, he cried when he saw injured animals. Emily was so sweet, always telling me she loved me. Where did those children go? At what point did money and success corrupt them so much? Maybe we'll never know, said Richard softly. But those children you remember, they made their own choices when they grew up. And those choices have consequences. A year passed since that terrible night in the rain. Mary and Robert's life had changed completely. They lived comfortably in their restored house, without financial worries. The Miller Foundation had helped more than 500 elderly people in similar situations, providing legal support to protect their properties, financial support for medical expenses, and most importantly, emotional support to heal from the trauma of family abandonment. Mary and Robert had become prominent advocates for elderly rights. They gave talks at universities like Michigan State, appeared in documentaries, worked with legislators in Lansing to create stronger laws against elder abuse. "I never imagined my life would take this turn," Robert told Mary one night while they dined quietly in their dining room. "Sometimes I feel like that night in the rain, as horrible as it was, needed to happen. It led us to this purpose." Mary took Robert's hand, feeling the scars of a lifetime of hard work. "I don't know if it needed to happen," she said thoughtfully, "but I can say we found meaning in the pain. We turned our tragedy into something that is helping others and that counts for something." That same night, there was a knock at the door. It was late, almost 10 p.m., and Mary and Robert rarely received visitors at that hour. Robert looked through the peephole and his expression hardened. It was their 4 children, all 4 standing on the porch waiting. "Don't open it," whispered Mary, panic rising in her voice. "Please, Robert, don't open it." Robert hesitated. Despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal, he still felt that pull in his heart. They were his children, the babies he had held, the children he had taught to ride a bike, the teenagers whose worries he had listened to patiently. But then he remembered that night, the piercing cold, the relentless rain, the closed doors, the absolute despair, and his resolve strengthened. "I'm not going to open it," said Robert firmly, "but I am going to talk to them." He approached the door but didn't open it. Instead, he spoke through it. "What do you want?" There was a moment of surprised silence on the other side, then Michael's voice trembling. "Dad, please, we need to talk to you and Mom. Just let us explain." "You already had your chance to explain," interrupted Robert. "You had months to explain while pressuring us to sell our house. You had a whole night to explain while we walked in the rain knocking on your doors. There is nothing left to explain." "Dad, we've changed," said Sarah's voice, broken by crying. "We understand now what we did. We understand it was horrible, unforgivable, but we are trying to be better people." "Does that count for nothing?" Mary approached the door, her heart beating so fast she thought it might break. She put her hand on the wood, knowing her children were right on the other side. "Have you really changed?" asked Mary with a trembling voice. "Or are you just sorry for the consequences?" There was a long silence. Then David's voice. At first I was just sorry for the consequences. I won't lie. But later, I saw what my abandonment did to an elderly woman at the nursing home where I do community service. Her name was Mrs. Henderson. She died alone, waiting for children who never came. And in that moment, Mom, in that moment I truly understood what I did to you, and I hated myself in a way I had never experienced. "And that is supposed to fix everything?" said Robert with a hard voice. "A late epiphany erases the pain you caused?" "No," replied Emily's voice, so soft it could barely be heard. "It erases nothing. I don't expect you to forgive me. None of us expect that. We just wanted you to know that we understand now, that we live every day with the shame of what we did, and that if we could change the past, we would do it without hesitation." Mary began to cry silently. Robert hugged her, both standing in front of the closed door separating them from their children. "Go away," said Robert finally, his voice breaking. "Please, just go away. We can't do this. It's too painful." "Dad, Mom," said Michael with desperation, "at least let us. Let us earn your forgiveness. Let us prove we have changed. Whatever you need, we will do it." "What we need," said Mary with a firmness that surprised even herself, "is peace. Peace to live the rest of our lives without the constant stress of wondering when you will hurt us again. And that peace can only come if you are not in our lives." "But we are family," sobbed Sarah's voice. "Family is more than blood," replied Mary. "Family is love, loyalty, support. And you demonstrated you have none of those things when it comes to us. So no, you are not our family anymore, not in the way that matters. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with pain on both sides of the door. Finally, they heard the sounds of their children walking away, their footsteps echoing on the driveway, a car starting and driving off. Mary collapsed into Robert's arms, sobbing. "Did we do the right thing?" she asked through tears. "Or are we being as cruel as they were to us?" "It's not the same," replied Robert, crying himself. "They rejected us when we were desperate and sick, when we literally had nowhere to go. We are rejecting them to protect our mental and emotional health. It is not the same, Mary. It is not the same." But even as he said the words, Robert wasn't completely sure. The pain of a parent is complex, full of contradictions. He loved his children even while rejecting them. He wanted them to be happy even while keeping them out of his life. It was an agony with no easy solution. The following months were quieter. The 4 siblings stopped trying to contact their parents directly. Instead, each had begun making genuine changes in their lives, changes that Mary and Robert would eventually hear about through mutual acquaintances and media reports. Michael had closed his company and started working as a financial consultant for nonprofits, helping specifically foundations that supported the elderly. It paid almost nothing compared to what he used to earn, but it gave him a sense of purpose that money never had. Sarah continued working at the free clinic, attending to poor families who couldn't afford health care. She lived modestly in a small apartment. She had sold all her luxurious possessions. On weekends, she volunteered at nursing homes, spending time with elderly people who had no family visiting them. David had found work as an art teacher at a public school in a poor neighborhood. He taught children who would never have had access to art education otherwise. He also still painted, but now he donated all his works to charity auctions, never keeping the money for himself. Emily worked in low-cost housing construction, using her architectural skills to design dignified homes for families who couldn't afford expensive architects. She lived in a modest apartment, drove an old car, had completely abandoned the luxurious lifestyle she once considered essential. Mary listened to these reports with mixed feelings. Part of her felt proud that her children were finally doing something meaningful with their lives. But another part, the part still bleeding from betrayal, wondered if these changes were genuine or just another form of manipulation. "Maybe they are trying to earn our forgiveness by doing good deeds," Mary told Richard one day during one of their regular chats. "Maybe," conceded Richard. "Or maybe they are finally learning what you and Robert tried to teach them all their lives, that a person's value isn't measured in money, but in how they treat others, especially the vulnerable." "Do you think I should ever speak to them again?" asked Mary. The question tormented her constantly. Richard thought carefully before answering. "I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to that question, Mary. Only you can decide when, if ever, you are ready to open that door. But what I will tell you is this: don't do it because you feel guilty or think you should. Do it only if you genuinely feel you can rebuild a relationship without hurting yourself in the process." 2 years passed since that night in the rain. Mary turned 74, Robert 77. Their health was relatively good for their age thanks to the best doctors they could now pay for and reduced stress in their lives. The Miller Foundation had grown significantly. It now had offices in 5 different cities. It had helped over 2,000 seniors and had been instrumental in passing 3 new state laws protecting older people from financial family abuse. One spring day, Mary received a letter. It didn't come from any of her children, but from her granddaughter Andrea, Emily's daughter whom she had helped raise. "Dear Grandma, it has been 2 years since I spoke to my mother, 2 years since our whole family imploded because of what they did to you. I have spent these 2 years watching from a distance, seeing how both you and Grandpa and my uncles and Mom have changed. I've seen your foundation and the incredible work you are doing. I've seen how you turned your pain into something that is helping thousands of people. I always knew you were strong, but now I see you are more than strong. You are inspiring. I have also been watching my mother. I know you probably don't want to hear about her, and I understand completely, but I feel you need to know this. She has really changed, Grandma. She isn't the superficial, status-obsessed woman she was 2 years ago. She lives in a small apartment. She works on housing projects for the poor. She has given up all the luxury she used to consider essential. But more than that, I've seen her cry. I've heard her talk about you, about what she did, about how she lives every day with shame and regret. She isn't telling you these things directly because she respects your decision to have no contact, but I thought you deserved to know. I am not asking you to forgive her. I am not asking you to restore the relationship. I am just telling you what I have observed. What you do with this information depends completely on you. I love you, Grandma, and I miss you. I would love to see you someday, if you want. With all my love, Andrea. Mary read the letter 3 times, tears running freely down her cheeks. Robert found her sitting in the garden, holding the letter, staring into space. "What's wrong, my love?" asked Robert, sitting next to her with a grunt from his arthritis. Mary handed him the letter. Robert read it in silence, his own tears starting to fall when he reached the end. "What do you want to do?" asked Robert after a long silence. "I don't know," admitted Mary. "Part of me wants to believe they have changed, but another part is so afraid of being hurt again." "And what about Andrea?" asked Robert. "She didn't do anything to you. We punished her because her mother sinned." Mary considered this. Andrea was innocent. More than that, Andrea had taken a moral stance when the family imploded, choosing not to speak to her mother because of what she had done. That required courage. "I want to see Andrea," decided Mary finally, "but only her. I'm not ready to see the others yet." Robert nodded. "Then that is what we will do." The reunion with Andrea was emotional. The 20-year-old arrived alone as Mary had requested. When Mary opened the door and saw her granddaughter standing there, both began to cry immediately. They hugged for what seemed like an eternity, both sobbing, both saying, "I missed you so much" at the same time. They spent the afternoon together, catching up on the last 2 years. Andrea told her about university, her new boyfriend, her future plans. Mary told her about the foundation, the people they had helped, how she had found a new purpose in her pain. "Grandma," said Andrea at one point in the conversation, "I want to ask you something, and please be completely honest. Do you think you will ever be able to forgive my mom and my uncles?" Mary thought carefully before answering. "Honestly, Andrea, I don't know. Forgiveness is complicated. On some level, I have already forgiven them because carrying that hatred is too heavy. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean restoring the relationship as if nothing happened." "But is there any possibility?" insisted Andrea. "Even a small one?" Mary looked at her granddaughter, saw the hope in her eyes, and her heart softened a little. "Maybe," she said finally, "if they have really changed, as you say, if they demonstrate consistently over years, not months, but years, that they are different, then maybe someday I could consider some kind of limited relationship, but it will never be what it was before. That is lost forever." Andrea nodded, accepting this answer. "It is more than I expected," she admitted. "And it is fair." Andrea's visits became regular. She came every 2 weeks, sometimes more often. Mary and Robert rediscovered the joy of having someone younger from the family in their lives. Andrea reminded them why they had worked so hard, why they had sacrificed so much. She represented the future generation, a generation that hopefully would learn from their parents' mistakes. One day, Andrea arrived with a proposal. "Grandma, Grandpa," she began nervously, "I know this is a lot to ask, but I graduate from college next month and I would love for you to be there." "Of course we will be there," replied Mary immediately, but then she stopped. "Wait. Your mother will be there, right?" Andrea nodded. "Yes, and probably my uncles too, although I'm not sure. But I can arrange it so you sit in different sections, so you don't have to interact if you don't want to." Mary and Robert looked at each other, holding a silent conversation that only couples who have been together for over 50 years can have. "We'll go," said Robert finally. "We are not going to miss your graduation for anything." The day of the graduation arrived. Mary got up early, more nervous than she had been in months. She tried on 3 different dresses before deciding on a navy blue one Robert had bought her recently. Robert put on his best suit, one Richard had insisted on buying him for foundation events. "We look good," said Robert, looking in the mirror next to Mary. "Like the elegant couple we always deserved to be." Mary smiled despite her nerves. "I never needed elegance, love. I only needed you." They arrived early at the university auditorium. Andrea had saved them seats in the third row, a prime location. While they waited for the ceremony to begin, Mary couldn't help but search the crowd for her children. She saw them eventually. The four were sitting together in a different section, near the back. From a distance, Mary could see how they all looked different. Thinner, more weathered by life, humbler in their bearing. Michael was no longer wearing his expensive suit. Sarah didn't have her flashy jewelry. David looked almost unrecognizable without his pretentious artist aesthetic. Emily, her baby, looked tired but somehow more genuine than before. When the four noticed Mary and Robert, their expressions were of shock mixed with hope. Michael made a move as if to stand up, but Sarah stopped him, shaking her head. They understood the message. Respect the distance their parents had established. The ceremony was beautiful. When Andrea walked across the stage to receive her diploma in psychology, Mary and Robert stood up and applauded with all their might, shouting her name, disregarding the stares of others in the audience. Andrea searched for their faces in the crowd, and when she found them, her smile widened so much it lit up her whole face. She pointed at them and then put her hand over her heart, a gesture that said more than 1,000 words. After the ceremony, while they waited for Andrea outside the auditorium, the four children approached. Mary felt her heart racing, her palms starting to sweat. "Mom, Dad," said Michael, stopping at a respectful distance. We wanted to say we are glad to see you, that you look good, that we hope." His voice broke, and he couldn't continue. Sarah picked up where he couldn't. "We hope that someday, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but someday we can talk, we can start to heal. We don't expect things to go back to how they were, but maybe we can build something new." Mary looked at her four children. She saw the tears in their eyes, saw the genuine regret in their expressions, and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years, a softening in her heart. "Not today," said Mary firmly, "but not cruelly. I am not ready today, but I will keep watching. I will keep seeing if the changes Andrea told me about are real and lasting. And if they are, then maybe someday we can have a conversation. But it will be on my terms, when I am ready." The four siblings nodded, accepting this as more than they expected. "Thank you," whispered Emily. "Thank you for not closing the door completely." "The door was closed for 2 years," replied Robert, "and it is still closed. But maybe, just maybe, it is not locked. That is all I can offer now." And with that, Mary and Robert walked away, holding hands, leaving their 4 children standing there, processing the first words they had exchanged in 2 years. That night in their house, Mary couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the look on her children's faces, about the genuine regret she had seen there. "Do you think we should give them a chance?" she asked Robert in the darkness of their room. "I don't know," admitted Robert. "My heart says yes, but my head warns me no. It is complicated. Everything with children is complicated," replied Mary. "But maybe Andrea is right. Maybe they have really changed. Or maybe they are just sorry for the consequences," pointed out Robert, but his voice lacked conviction. Several more months passed. Andrea continued to be the bridge between Mary, Robert, and their children. She brought stories of how each one was continuing their charitable work, how they lived more modest and meaningful lives. But life, as it often does, threw one final test at them. Robert suffered another stroke. This one was far more severe than the previous ones. Mary was with him when it happened in their house, one quiet afternoon. One moment Robert was reading the newspaper, and the next he had collapsed in his chair, unconscious. Mary called the ambulance immediately, screaming in panic. At the hospital, doctors told her Robert had suffered a massive stroke. He was alive, but in critical condition. The next 48 hours would be crucial. Mary called Andrea, her voice broken by panic and tears. "Andrea, your grandfather is in the hospital. It's serious. It's very serious." "I'm on my way," replied Andrea immediately. "Do you want me to tell my mom and my uncles?" Mary hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep them out, even now. But another part, the part that understood this might be their last chance to see their father, couldn't be that cruel. "Tell them," said Mary finally. But tell them to come prepared for me to say they can't enter. It is my decision." The 4 siblings arrived at the hospital in less than an hour. Mary was sitting in the waiting room when they arrived, her face pale, her hands shaking. When they saw her, everyone froze, waiting to see how she would react. Mary looked at them one by one. She saw the genuine fear in their faces, the concern for Robert, which was clearly real. "You can stay," said Mary finally, her voice barely a whisper, but in silence. "I don't want to talk right now, just stay." It was a small gesture, but for her 4 children it was like being given the world. They sat in the waiting room, keeping a respectful distance from Mary, but they're present. For the first time in 2 years, they were there when it really mattered. The hours passed slowly. Doctors came out periodically with updates, but the news wasn't good. Robert was struggling. His brain had suffered significant damage. They weren't sure if he would wake up, and if he did, they didn't know what level of cognitive function he would have. Mary stayed strong through all this, answering doctors' questions, making decisions about treatments. But when they finally let her see Robert, when she saw her husband of 55 years connected to dozens of machines, unconscious, her strength collapsed. She sat by his bed and took his hand, the same hand she had held for so many years, and cried. She cried for the man she loved. She cried for all the years they had shared. She cried for the possibility that this might be the end. "Don't leave me," whispered Mary, kissing his hand. "Please, love, don't leave me. Not yet. We have more life to live together. We have more memories to create. Please, fight for us." Outside the room, the 4 siblings watched through the glass. Seeing their mother like that, so broken, so vulnerable, broke their hearts in a way nothing else could. "We should be in there with her," said Sarah with a broken voice. "She shouldn't be alone." "But she kept us out because we deserve it," replied Michael, "because we abandoned her when she needed us. Now we have to respect her decision to keep us out when she needs space." The critical 48 hours passed. Robert survived, but doctors said the road to recovery would be long and difficult. He would need extensive rehabilitation. He might recover some function, but he would never be completely the same. During the days Robert was in intensive care, Mary practically lived at the hospital. And during all that time, her 4 children were there too, not inside the room, but in the waiting room. They arrived early every morning and stayed late every night. They brought food for Mary, although she rarely ate. They brought her pillows and blankets. They made sure she had everything she needed. They didn't speak much. Mary still wasn't ready for deep conversations, but their presence, their silent support, began to soften something in her heart. One night, a week after Robert's stroke, Mary came out of the room to stretch her legs. It was almost midnight, and she expected the waiting room to be empty. But all 4 were there, all asleep in uncomfortable chairs, refusing to go home. Mary stopped and watched them. Michael slept with his jacket as a pillow, his face marked by exhaustion. Sarah had her head resting against the wall, still dressed in her clothes from the free clinic. David was curled up in a fetal position on 2 chairs pushed together. Emily was leaning against Michael's arm, both unconscious. They looked vulnerable, they looked tired, they looked human. Mary felt tears welling in her eyes. These were her children. Despite everything they had done, despite the pain they had caused, they were still her children. And here they were sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs, refusing to leave, trying to be there for her in the only way they knew how. "Why are you all still here?" asked Mary aloud, waking the 4 of them. They woke up startled, disoriented for a moment. Michael spoke first. "Because we need you, Mom. And we hoped maybe you needed us too. You've been here every day," observed Mary. "Why?" "Because the last time you were in a hospital with Dad sick, we weren't there," replied Sarah, tears running down her face. "We weren't there when you needed us most. But we are here now, and we will stay here even if you send us away, even if you never forgive us. We will be here because it is the right thing to do." Seeing them asleep in those uncomfortable hospital chairs finally feels like a genuine act of love, not a transaction. It seems they've finally learned that being a family means showing up when it's hard, not just when it's convenient. Mary sat in one of the empty chairs, physically and emotionally exhausted. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "The pain is so deep, The betrayal was so complete. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. We understand, said David. And we don't expect forgiveness. We just hope. We hope we can be in your life in some way, even if it's from a distance, even if it's just as acquaintances who bring you coffee in hospitals. It is more than we deserve. Emily knelt in front of her mother, looking her straight in the eyes. Mom, I've thought every day about that night, about how I closed my door, about how I chose a man who manipulated me over the woman who gave me life and raised me when I made the mistake of getting pregnant at 17. I chose you then when I was the one who needed help, but I didn't choose you when you needed me. And I will live with that shame the rest of my life. We will all live with that, added Michael. But if you give us the chance, we will spend the rest of our lives trying to make up for it. Not because we expect that to erase what we did, but because it is what we should have been doing from the beginning. Mary looked at the four of them. She saw the genuine regret on their faces. She heard the sincerity in their voices and made a decision. Okay, she said finally. You can stay. You can help. But this doesn't mean everything is forgiven. It doesn't mean we go back to being a happy family as if nothing happened. It means I am willing to let you start the long, very long process of earning a place in my life again. Do you understand? The four nodded vigorously, tears of relief running down their faces. We understand, said Michael. And we promise you, Mom, that this time will be different. This time we will show you that we have truly changed. And so began the slow, painful, but ultimately hopeful reconstruction of a broken family. Robert spent 2 months in the hospital and in rehab. During all that time, Mary was never alone. Her 4 children took turns being with her, supporting her, helping her with the 1,001 tasks that came with caring for someone with a serious illness. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments where old resentments surfaced. There were times when Mary looked at one of her children and remembered that night in the rain and the pain was as fresh as if it had been yesterday. But there were also moments of genuine connection, moments where Sarah used her medical expertise to help Mary understand Robert's prognosis, moments where Michael handled all financial and insurance aspects of the treatment, ensuring Mary didn't have to worry about that, moments where David brought paintings to decorate Robert's hospital room, making the space less sterile and more homey. Moments where Emily redesigned areas of Mary's house to make it easier for Robert to move around when he finally returned home. And slowly, very slowly, something began to heal. When Robert finally woke up completely from his semi-conscious state, the first person he saw was Mary. She was holding his hand, as she had done for weeks. "Hi, my love," whispered Mary with tears of joy. "You came back to us." "I never left," Robert managed to say, his speech slow and labored due to the stroke. "Always here with you." "The kids are here," Mary told him softly. "They have been here every day. Do you want to see them?" Robert closed his eyes, processing this information. "Changed?" he asked finally. "I think so," replied Mary. "I think they really have." When the 4 children entered the room and saw their father awake for the first time in weeks, they couldn't contain their emotions. They approached his bed, each touching his arm, his hand, his shoulder, physically reconnecting with the man who gave them life. "Dad," said Michael with a trembling voice. "I am so sorry. I am sorry more than words can express." Robert looked at each of them, his eyes moist. "Actions, not words," he managed to say with difficulty. "Show me you changed." "We will, Dad," promised Sarah. "We promise we will." And they kept that promise. During the following months, while Robert continued his rehabilitation, the 4 siblings demonstrated their commitment not only with words, but with consistent actions. They participated actively in his recovery, attending physical therapy sessions, learning how to help him with exercises at home, ensuring Mary had the support she needed. But more importantly, they continued the changes they had made in their own lives. Michael continued working with nonprofits. Sarah continued at the free clinic. David continued teaching art to poor children. Emily continued designing low-cost housing. They didn't do it to impress their parents. They did it because they had finally found meaning in serving others instead of serving only themselves. 3 years after that terrible night in the rain, The Miller family gathered at Mary and Robert's house to celebrate Robert's 78th birthday. It was a small gathering. Mary, Robert, the 4 children and the grandchildren, including Andrea. The atmosphere was different from how family gatherings had been before everything happened. There was no pretension, no ostentation. The food was simple, but made with love. The conversations were genuine. The laughter was real. Robert, although he still walked with a cane and his speech had never fully recovered, was happy. He looked around the table, saw his family gathered, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. After dinner, Michael stood up and asked for attention. "Mom, Dad," he began, his voice steady. "I know we have talked about this many times in the last few years, but my siblings and I wanted to make something official." He took out an envelope and gave it to Mary and Robert. "This is a deed, the deed to this house completely in your names, without any clauses, without any conditions. And it is an agreement signed by the 4 of us, where we formally renounce any claim on this property during your lives or after." Mary opened the envelope with trembling hands. Sure enough, there was the legal document signed by the 4 children and notarized. "Also," continued Sarah, "we have established a trust that guarantees you will always have enough money for any medical or personal need. It is not charity. It is our duty as your children. It is what it always should have been. And finally," added David, "we want you to know that if you ever need anything, anything at all, we will be there. Without conditions, without expectations of anything in return, just because you are our parents and we love you." Emily, the youngest, spoke last. "We know we can never fully make up for what we did. We know the trust we broke may never be fully restored. But we want to spend the rest of our lives trying, not because we expect forgiveness, but because it is the right thing to do." Mary and Robert looked at each other, both with tears running down their faces. It had been 3 years since that horrible night. 3 years of pain, of slow healing, of careful reconstruction. "I have already forgiven you," said Mary finally, her voice broken by emotion. "Not immediately, not easily. But at some point in the last year I forgave you, because I saw that your regret was genuine. I saw that your actions matched your words. I saw that you had become the people I always hoped you would be." "Thank you," whispered Michael, falling to his knees in front of his mother. His siblings did the same, all 4 kneeling before their parents, crying. Mary and Robert put their hands on their children's heads, blessing the next generation, forgiving the past, embracing an uncertain future, but one full of hope. "Family isn't perfect," said Robert with his slow but clear speech. "It is complicated, it is difficult, but it is worth fighting for." And he was right. The family that sat around that table that day wasn't the same one that had existed 3 years ago. It was different, scarred, but somehow stronger for having been broken and rebuilt. The following years were the most peaceful Mary and Robert had experienced in decades. Their children visited them regularly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. The grandchildren spent time with their grandparents learning family stories, valuing the intergenerational connection that was almost lost forever. The Miller Foundation continued to grow, now with the active help of the 4 children. Michael managed the finances. Sarah provided free medical services to the elderly they helped. David taught art therapy classes. Emily designed housing modifications to make homes more accessible for seniors. When Mary turned 80, her 4 children organized a special celebration. It wasn't lavish, but it was meaningful. They invited all the people Mary and Robert had helped through the foundation. Dozens of elderly people who had been rescued from abusive situations, who had been protected from greedy children, who had found dignity in their golden years thanks to Mary and Robert's work. "Dear Mom," said Emily during her speech at the celebration, "5 years ago I made the worst mistake of my life. I closed the door on you when you needed me most. I thought I had my priorities straight, that my marriage and my career were the most important things, but I was completely wrong." Emily paused, wiping away tears. "You taught me the true meaning of love and sacrifice, although I had to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. And now every day I try to live by the values you and Dad always held, but which I had forgotten. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for giving us another chance. And thank you for being the kind of mother you always were, even when we didn't deserve it." There were few dry eyes in the room when Emily finished speaking. That night, after everyone left, Mary and Robert sat on their porch looking at the stars, as they had done thousands of times during their 58 years of marriage. "Was it worth it?" asked Robert, taking Mary's hand. "All the pain, all the struggle, was it worth it?" Mary thought carefully before answering. "I don't know if it was worth it," she said honestly. "There are still days when I remember that night in the rain and the pain is as fresh as if it were yesterday. But I do know this. In the end, we recovered something precious. Not exactly what we had before, but something different. Something that was tested by fire and survived. So maybe I wouldn't say it was worth it, but I would say that at least we found meaning in the pain. And that counts for something." Robert nodded, understanding completely. They had walked through the darkest valley and emerged on the other side, scarred but survivors. Their family had been broken and rebuilt, and although it would never be the same, it was genuine in a way it had never been before. "I love you," whispered Robert, kissing Mary's hand. "And I love you," replied Mary. "Always. Even when everything fell apart, even when we had nothing except each other, I always loved you." And in that moment, sitting on their porch under the stars with their family finally at peace, Mary and Robert knew they had won. Not in the way they had expected, not without pain or loss, but they had won. Their love had survived, their dignity had been restored, and their children had finally learned the value of family. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a real ending, full of hope and redemption, and that was all they had asked for. Money can buy a house, but it cannot buy a home. Fame may bring admiration, but only character commands respect. Mary and Robert's children had to lose absolutely everything just to learn this fundamental lesson. We hope this story has warmed your heart and served as a reminder to cherish our parents while we still can. If this story touched your soul, please give it a like and share it with your loved ones. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to join us for more meaningful life lessons. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.